I would love to ask each of you three, when you decided to really go all in on digital CS strategies. Lane, being at Gainsight, I would love to hear about that journey. Could you kick us off?
Yeah. So about 3.5 years ago, we were right in let me see if I can math this morning. I think it was like late 2020, early 21. We were hitting that boom in SaaS, right? We saw a lot of sales turnaround. It was still growth at all costs. And then we were bringing in more customers, and we had to figure out, how do we support these customers? We were also hitting the point where adding additional headcount was not going to be the answer. So how do we really service these customers to make sure that they're successful and that we're successful? And so we really started leaning into that. How do we figure this out? How do we take digital motions? How do we take pooled success? How do we take CS in general and really start to break the mold on what customer success used to look like and what it can be? And as we did that, it was really fun to dive in and just kind of pull that apart and tease it out and see where those motions could lie as we go through that. And so we really started leaning into that. And the other piece about it is, Gainsight, we've historically up to that point been very white glove on all of our CS engagements, from our smallest customers to our largest. And our customers were asking us like, hey, how do you do this at the time, this tech touch thing? And not really having a motion built out that really supported our customers meant that we needed to lean into it and learn as well to develop those so that we could understand and share those best practices with our customers.
I love that. So it was like a mix of necessity and then also being the tech out there that everybody relies on, like wanting to be, the benchmark for that. Yeah. Was it similar for you at Monday, Dan?
A little bit there, actually. So for me, it was a little different where I laughed that my journey kind of with it all started more organically through a company that I was at called Think HR before Monday, where we were a B2B to B platform in a lot of ways, where the contract management was done at a very kind of enterprise level because we sold to insurance brokers, but the actual end users of our product who drove like the renewability and expansion was the clients of those insurance brokers we sold to. So for every like enterprise style contract we sent, it was hundreds, if not thousands of end companies, not just end users, but actual end companies that were benefiting from our product. So having to find ways to engage them at scale was what drove me to understanding and really kind of buying from the get-go, digital not being a segment, but a strategy, because this is for these large enterprise customers focusing on how do we do that. And then, yeah, similar at Monday with coming in to find a way to profitably help drive scale adoption for customers and accelerate the growth that they weren't necessarily experiencing just through organic PLG motions. So to be able to help provide a customer success mindset on developing that scale long tail of customers initially, and then eventually going beyond just that long tail to help other segments with the digital strategies there.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. And yeah, I guess yours generated out of necessity for that B2B2B company because you couldn't get in front of their customers, right? So
right, exactly.
Like how you would build these kind of services for a partner team.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Dan. Summer, how about you? When did you decide to go all in on digital CS?
I think it was out of necessity as well, a little bit of kind of Lane's story and a little bit of Dan's story. The organization I used to work with we had over 6 digits, like our customer base was large. And most of the customers were coming in at a price point that we just didn't have the headcount to cover. And so customers were purchasing licenses, coming in at a lower price point and not getting the support they needed to be successful within that first year. And I'm very, very passionate about customer experiences and making sure that we're driving really good customer experiences and outcomes. And it was just a gap with our customer base. And so one of the things that was so critically important to us as an organization was finding a way to meet those customers where they are, so they were able to get the tools and supports they needed to be successful. And then as we built those out, we found out that we were not just building those for the customers we were unable to cover because we didn't have the headcount. We were actually building those resources for our full customer base and overall improving everybody's experience. So that's kind of what led to us creating and then driving that customer success motion in that digital space.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I keep hearing necessity coming through, right? But y'all were like recognizing this before the rest of the market was. So this is great. Like I'm very grateful to have you all here because it's hard to find experts in this space if I'm honest. And I'm sure that you've all observed that as well. Which channels have you found most success in for digital strategies to improve retention, adoption, expansion, etc.?
I think they're all critically important. I think the biggest thing we want to do is meet our customers where they are.
Yeah.
And you can't be assumptive. Some people spend the majority of their day in their email. Some of the customers that we've had, you are never going to reach them if you're not in app. So it's just making sure that you've got the right places for the customers to kind of interact with you and your organization. One of the things I actually like about Gainsight, kind of plug in for Lane here, is that the all the different pop-ups I get in product kind of remind me what I need to do. It's been great because I've actually got a new account as a new user in a new organization, and that's where I am. That's where I like to be met. But then there's a lot of people wanting more passive communication. I do agree, chatbot and community being lower is surprising to me. Community is such a great way to build your brand and to build recognition and to get that interaction. It drives a lot of advocacy. And then the chatbot, I think we're also used to it with the advancements we've seen in AI in the last year. I think having a chatbot in place and having a really strong chatbot built for your organization is going to be incredibly important for the digital success strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, Lane, feel free to jump in.
I'll chime in on the community aspect real quick, right? Because it's actually didn't surprise me. And part of the reason why is the ownership of it and where it has historically landed. And so with community, it historically has typically lived in a marketing world or a product world. And so the idea of being the ideas of community are natural when you start thinking about CS in the sense of networking and sharing information. But historically, it's been built in the different places. And so last year, I think that number would have been lower. And in 2 years, I think it's going to be exponentially higher. And the other piece to this is looking across all of these, there's this idea of multi-channel versus omni-channel, right? Multi-channel is this, to me, I interpret that as I'm going to send the same message through all of my channels, right? And that's just kind of flooding and creating too much noise. But when you really look at it from an omni-channel perspective is, what is the message in this channel that I need to send or use to get the right next action? So in community, if you're trying to drive adoption, you might be trying to create a knowledge share, a best practice share around that feature or a workflow. While in-app, you're using that more to say, hey, this is the step to take to do this. And an event is also, let's all collaborate together. So they have their different use cases, but they can still support the overall message and the goal of adoption, advocacy, renewals, and those different items. And really taking it at that view of like, what is the use of this channel, the purpose of it, and how will I communicate my message for that purpose in this channel?
Yeah.
I think I must be borrowing Lane's brain because I had a very similar thought around the community, but also even on the chatbot component, where when you think of that, a lot of where companies are starting their initial use cases with that, it's being owned by a support team and being owned by whatever part of the org owns support. And so similar to Lane's comments about community, so I won't say too much, but I think very similar that you'll see that expand in CS over the coming years, but it's really more of an ownership and where it lives in the org right now, as opposed to whether CS can actually benefit from it or not. So similar reaction to you there, Lane, which means I know I'm in good company if I'm thinking similar to you. So, but similar, I think that on the concept there, when it comes to what channels we found effective, like I found effectiveness in across the board here, and so to kind of have a similar thought process to what Lane and Summer were outlining there, I've approached it very much with thinking through what's the desired outcome we're trying to achieve with a customer and who are we trying to achieve that with? And then deciding channel from there. If I'm trying to broaden use cases with people who might not necessarily already be in app and thinking about how they can use it, in app is not a great channel for that. I'm going to go email. I'm going to use that for business unit leaders that are in teams that typically live in their email. If I'm trying to deepen a use case for someone who's already going in the product to do a certain thing, contextually, I will absolutely lean on in-app messaging to help drive them to how they can deepen that use case there. Or if I'm easing friction with a use case that I know people are trying to accomplish, I'll lean into in-app messaging. If I'm trying to connect people to potential, opportunities of broadening their way of even thinking about the product, I will connect them to community. And so I think it a lot of it is to lean into Lane's idea with the omni-channel there, thinking through what channel makes sense for the outcome I'm trying to achieve. So starting with what is the actual outcome you want to achieve, not starting with the channel, because starting with the channel is putting cart before horse, I think. When
Yeah.
rather than mapping what is it you're trying to get done with a customer, and then who are you trying to influence to do that, and then from there using the appropriate channel accordingly.
You're absolutely right. It's about the objectives. And I was gonna I was gonna double click into that, Dan, because it's also about the persona, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I might be stealing from a question that we're going to ask at the end here. But with what Dan has said, one of the things that I always talk to our customers about when they're asking, like, where do I start? What do I do? Is like, take what you have right now, take the emotions that you have and back into it and say, what is the value I want the customer to get out of this motion? What is the value I want to get out of this motion? And then decide how to deliver it, right? So if you are operating in a very high touch CS organization, this was actually conversations I've had a couple of times today already internally, is like, let's forget the fact that we're using a cadence call for the month, right? What are we actually trying to drive here? And then what other way can we drive that, right? And so thinking about it of the value that I'm trying to drive, then what channel can I use for that? And then that gets you into where you need to go. But if you start with, I need to do in-app or I need to do email, you're not going to solve the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
It touches in
And I
on
love
that.
with,
I'm sorry, Dan.
no, it's all good.
It touches in on the importance of personalization. It's you need to make sure that when you're working in the digital space, we're not trying to do a blanket approach. It really needs to be personalized to where the customer is in their journey, what they're trying to accomplish, and the overall goals. And so anytime you're thinking about the different channels you're using for communication, it's important that you're really thinking about, again, what are we trying to accomplish and how are we keeping this personalized, even though we're reaching out at scale.
And what I love is when you take that outcomes first approach, it's also how you keep the customer at the center. Because when you start with your channels, you start with, oh, efficiency. You start with, yes, those are like the outcomes you get. Absolutely. You get more efficient, you get more profitable. But the result can be messaging that is centers just around your company and your goals, which doesn't keep an experience that your customers want to have. And so if you keep them at the center by thinking of the outcomes first, then you can achieve these other company-centric goals of efficiency, profitability, all of that, while not compromising the customer's experience along the way.
Oh my gosh, I need to just like edit that clip and like get it out there because I love what you shared, Dan. That was so precise and on point. All right, so we've talked about channels and how you should be thinking about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve through the channels before you go to the channels, how you should be thinking about the personas and how they want to be met as well, like where's the best place to meet them. Lane, you mentioned something about multi-channel versus omni-channel and like how multi-channel is like spray and pray, like let's just put this message out everywhere and hope it makes an impact, and omni-channel being like, okay, we maybe start in app and if they don't do it there then we give them an email, and if that doesn't work then we get someone to reach out to them. What we haven't got this in the questions that we were planning to go into, but I'm curious, Lane, like what do you think people need to get right to deliver that omni-channel experience as opposed to multi-channel experience?
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, right? What is the outcome? How are we going to measure? How are we going to define it? And so when we're thinking about omni-channel, you might only have a couple channels at your disposal, right? So like when I think all four of us started in this, we had email, we had in-app, we probably had webinars, right? So how do we like use all of those to it? And now we have more at our disposal. So really trying to think through, what is the purpose of my channel? What am I trying to drive here? And really going back to one of the things I love is it's very easy in a B2C organization, a little bit harder in B2B because of the cost of setup. But what I love doing is going through an onboarding workflow, going through and experiencing something as your own customer. And then you start to understand those spots of that really doesn't make sense there. I don't know why I got that. And then you're able to kind of open up and take that lens off and say, okay, here's what the customers are feeling. And one of the things that has kind of resonated and I've heard through all of our answers is back to that experience, right? If we can't experience our platform or our life cycle as our end users do, we're never going to understand how to get there.
For sure.
I love that because that's similar. One of the low-hanging fruits I always tell people when you want to find a quick way to see where the gaps are in your current channels and your current processes is if you just sign up for all the things you're saying you're telling your customers to sign up for. And then when you realize the kind of conflicting messaging that you're getting via email from multiple channels over the course of a week and the cadence there, you realize quickly, oh, this isn't creating an experience that the customer likes. And then you can gain some of that empathy. It's nothing beats going through that, like you said, Lane. It's hard to scale sometimes, but I think it's absolutely worth the investment.
It can be overwhelming for customers if you don't take the time to do that. And Lane, I loved your answer because you didn't mention tech like Gainsight, which I thought you were going to lead. I was like setting you up there.
Yeah. So let's go back to that, right? So when we're thinking about setting it up, right? And we're thinking about the tools, right? One of the things that I try to be as much product agnostic when we do this with lots of people, but let's dial in a little bit, right? So when we're thinking about how do we use these tools, Gainsight is in a unique position. The fact that I have the opportunity to use in-app, email, community, and LMS. All right. And we don't own a webinar platform, but we have Zoom that we use, right? So we have 4 of all of the tools listed here and within our product suite, right? And the nice part about that is they can talk to each other, they share data with each other. And so we can build together a program that's orchestrated across all the products to say, hey, executive, here's this email. Now, if they go into the application, they're going to see something else that continues that experience from the email to the application. Or we can say, hey, executive, did you know that you could learn about this new hot topic in the industry and put them into a learning path within our LMS, right? And then they use that LMS and they might then, once they finish that, we send them information about how to experience something in the community. And so we're able to orchestrate those experiences together through that omni-channel aspect that we can then report on. One of my favorite things to do, we built this about 3 quarters ago, was you're able to say, like, what is everything that a user sees across all of the channels that we have, right? So now we don't even have to go in and create a user ourselves. We can just see it. And we can see on average what they are. We can then see when they experience certain things, they are healthier. They use the platform, they adopt the platform, they renew at a higher rate. When we're able to guide them through the right experience for their user, for their persona, and for their use case.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm so excited about Gainsight's holistic abilities here. And I'll do a plug for where I work, right? So I work for Twilio Segment. We help out with the data side of things, which I think is equally important, right? Having that data to a point where it is clean, that you can actually run these omni-channel programs is something I'm very grateful to be able to do in my role at Twilio Segment that has been very hard to achieve in other places. Summer, anything to add on that?
No, I think everybody kind of summed it up incredibly well. I think though that to your point, when you're building these, Gainsight has been a lifesaver for us being able to roll out digital programs. The team I'm with now uses it. The team I was with before uses it as well. But to your point, the data is so critically important. If you aren't seeing exactly what you need to see, you could be making the wrong choices, and kind of going in, understanding the journey, but also being able to look and have that visibility is incredibly important when you're trying to drive and make decisions in this space.
100%. Okay, all right. I love where these conversations are going. I'm gonna pose a new question, throw it out there. So whoever wants to answer it first, hop right in. What roles are critical to scaling CS programs?
I think some of the ones that I've found that are, I think, more specific to scale CS. I think a good starting one has often been a program manager, because you can get a little bit of flexibility with that, but someone who's going to be kind of part technology strategist, part understanding the data analysis, being able to separate, signal from noise. Someone who can help design and orchestrate what are those digital touches. Someone who can own that from a strategy and execution perspective, I think is a key role. And then the different parts of that role, I think, as your team evolves, can then be broken out into separate, more specialized roles. Someone who handles the data specifically, someone who handles the tech strategist specifically, content development specifically, right? Because a lot of these are things that acquire those creations over time. But I also think that having a scale-minded CSM is crucial. Having a person that knows how and when to make a quick impact with a customer, because I think we all would agree while we're talking digital and tech and the strategy, it's not about removing where and when a person's ever going to be involved. It's about making sure that's at the right point in the right time. And so having someone who is scale-minded is still, I think, a crucial role within that kind of an org.
What does scale-minded mean to you?
Yeah, I think someone who scale-minded for me is someone who can focus more on the impact and the quick impact, I would say, and not focus necessarily on just the traditional CSM background of long-term focus, building a long-term relationship, all of those components, which are absolutely still a vital part of the CS lifecycle. But for me, scale-minded is someone whose focus is on the quick impact with customers, as opposed to maybe leaning into a long-term relationship building.
I love that quick impact. That's a great way to describe it. Summer.
No, I was so many. I think honestly, it really, I mean, it's such an organizational, like it has to be a strategy, right, across the whole organization to understand what needs to be done. I think Dan hit the nail on the head with some of those departments, to kind of what I said before, analytics. I think a really strong analytics team, someone who's able to take the data, translate it, be able to kind of figure out where you are, who you're working with, and having that data accessible is incredibly important. I think, I think the type of person you also need, I mean, there has to be a lot of passion in this space. I can say for Dan and Lane, I've spoken with them both offline before, extremely passionate people about making sure that we're having a really good experience for the customer, where we are, how we're doing it, what the communication is. So I think that's also critically important, not just that you have someone who can, pivot quickly, move, roll things up quickly, but also is just very passionate, because I think that passion prevents a lot of mistakes that could happen if someone was just moving quickly without paying attention to the impact, kind of tied to what we said before. I think, we would be amiss if we didn't kind of highlight our ops teams in this space as well. They are really kind of a strong backbone of what's needed when you're building out these different programs and processes. I think that you'll also always need a kind of a strong CSM group to customers respond, right? You think you're going into a motion where we're going more digital. It's not really human to human interaction, but you need to make sure that when the customer needs that hand holding, someone's there to pick up that piece. So I think that team's incredibly important. And they have a lot of weight that they carry on them, and they definitely deserve recognition for that hard work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've loved everything, right? And I think that where, data is important, ops is important, having someone who can do a program manager, I want to focus a little bit more on like what I'm looking for when I'm hiring someone, right?
Yeah.
So the title might be program manager, might be scaled success, whatever that is, right? I'm really looking for what 3 years ago would have been a unicorn, but I think is less unicorny now.
Mhm.
That was a weird word, unicorny. But the idea that I want someone who understands data and how it relates to other data, right? So someone who I used to be able to say, like, if you can build an Excel doc with a VLOOKUP and do some pivot tables and tell me how like a trend in data, that's something I'm looking for at that level, right? I also want someone who understands the foundations of customer success. And then I'm also looking for someone who has an understanding of marketing metrics and marketing motions.
Mhm.
So when you bring all three of those pieces of someone together, they can look at the trends in data and say, here's something that we need to try and address, to combat, to get ahead of. And then they can also say, okay, from a CS perspective, from a success perspective, this is how I might try and get that outcome. And then that marketing perspective says, what email do I need to do? What webinar do I need to do? What in-app do I need to do? And then data and marketing motions tells me I now know how to measure that. Right. So when we put all of those together, when we talk about a program manager, I'm looking for those three things, right? Or an ops person to support, I'm looking for those three things. If that is my very first hire, that is what I'm looking for, is those three things.
I love that. Data, marketing, CS. Yep, absolutely. Any like specific roles or titles that you think are absolutely needed in a digital CS or scaled motion? We've had program manager, we've had operations. Any other ones?
The other roles that I have on my team, so I have program managers, I have in-app experience designers, I have what we call a JO operator, so someone who manages our journey orchestrator, so our emails and orchestrating how programs work together. And then I also have an events person. So for our customer events, our digital events are run through the team as well. But it definitely started with a program manager, a pooled CSM, and a person who could do in-apps, and myself. So it really did start small and grow from there. But I think those types of titles, program manager could go either. It could be program manager, it could be scaled success. I think that when we get down to like what they do is more important than the title that they have.
Right. So who decides between your org, like if you have a certain program, you have one person running it and then they go to the different
So we
points?
have it set up in a pod type structure. So we have a program manager, an in-app designer, a JO orchestrator within that. And so they work together on the product lines that they're associated with, right? And the same for the other one. And then the events person kind of helps share across them when they need things.
Makes sense. That's a great structure. Thank you for sharing that. Any other tips on roles and org design?
Yeah, I think it's complexity there. I think that how digital is found within an organization is what roles are associated with it and how it sits. Like where I was previously, it was, hey, Summer, go sit over here and figure this out, which I loved. I mean, I think we could all raise our hand when Lane said, yeah, someone who's obsessed with data, we probably are all obsessed with data. So very happy in my corner building this out. When I'm lucky at the new organization I've gone to, we have an amazing team who is running this digital program to the point where I'm like, I'll come and visit that a little bit later. They've got this under control. So I think that it's, the company I was at before, our community team was under marketing because community existed at my previous company before digital did. And so they stayed separate. We were seeing a lot of outreach that was done with marketing that eventually kind of rolled into digital success. And so I think that a lot of the teams and the people who are needed are sitting in several different areas, just kind of based off the maturity of the program and how your organization has moved forward. But I agree, if you're building a program, you need your data obsessed person, program manager who can help build it. You definitely need your skilled CSM. And then I think another skill set that most people in this space have is the ability to build something great from very little resources. So you start with those, and then you can really build out something very, very magical.
Love that. And I think just synthesizing on my end a little bit from what they've both shared, I think I could not emphasize more what Lane said with it matters more about what's being done than specific titles.
Yeah.
And I also, I think, at least when it comes to just very tactically as a leader building out these roles, I care a lot less about fighting for ownership of certain things and more making sure that components are being taken care of for customers, even if it's being done and owned by another team initially. Even if long term, I think that something should live under digital CS. I think rather than trying to fight for all of it at once out the gate, that can kind of result in overwhelming setup depending on where your company is and its maturity, like Summer was alluding to. I think it's okay to lean into letting other people kind of initially start with owning different components and focus on what you own so you can kind of prove the value of what you have when you're starting out.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It is important about the work being done. I think the titles less so for sure. Okay, Lane, you pioneered the pooled CSM model at Gainsight. And I think a lot of people hear pooled CSM and they think that might be the be all and end all of digital CS. Of course, we know it's not, it's a part of it, but would love to know how you created this model, how you pioneered it, examples of how it was able to improve efficiencies, improve retention.
So we were standing up digital success at the same time we were standing up pooled. And
Got
so having both of those teams on my team, it allowed us to create feedback loops. And it allowed our digital programs to even move faster because we had the pooled CSMs who were hearing from multiple customers. And so they could say, here's a theme for this month. Let's do an office hours about it or a webinar about it. And then we could take that resource. One of the things that that we talk about a lot is create once, reuse multiple times. So we have now that we have a webinar or an office hours, what can we take out of there to make an email, to put in an app engagement, to create a community post? And not that you're putting the same message in each one, it's the right message for each of those that you can share out and then build it into life cycle journeys. So having that feedback loop to say, okay, here's something that we hear, let's put it over here. And with pooled success, one of the things that I've always cautioned people about is you can very easily burn someone out in that if they're only ever being reactive. And so for a measurement for that team, not only did we have to hit a GRR number, but each of them had a project each quarter that they worked on to get to a spot that could be sustainable and programmatic. So one CSM would manage our office hours program. And he'd say, okay, here's the topic that I want to do this month. Here's the format of it. And he would do that. And we got it to a very repeatable process that we could then hand off to our digital events manager.
Yep.
We had someone else who's focused on what does a digital business review look like? And he continues to build on it and iterate on. And someone else who's focused on our red account initiative. What accounts have something similar that they're at risk for? How can I bring them all together to talk about it and get them on the right path and then move on to the next group? And so by having that, you don't have one person who's focused solely on risk. And maybe that's just my personality, but if my only job was managing at-risk accounts,
you're going to burn out. Yeah.
And so then once the programs got sustainable, or if after a quarter or two, we couldn't get it sustainable, we would rotate them around to get a different set of eyes on it. And then we would rotate them out into the programs team once they were in a repeatable process. And so by being able to say, here's what our current engagement model looks like before we had pooled success, we did that motion of, what are we trying to do with this motion? Okay, we're trying to get information to the customer. Great, this is how we're going to do it. And we put together a resource deck, said all of the resources that are available to you as a digital-led customer at Gainsight. And if you think about that, I think even as our CSM team, we never had that. We were never able to say, like, here's the slide of everything that you have available to you, right? But when you do digital and you have that pooled, you have to have that list so people know, right? So it was very powerful being able to jump on a prospect call or on a transition call and say, there are 10 different resource types available to you as a customer. Our other customers, they had most of those too, but they probably couldn't articulate that they had 10 or something like that. So being able to be very clear in what resources you have available to you, how you can use them, and then following through with that. So in our monthly touch points, they're now delivered over email, but putting a very strong call to action in. Did you know you haven't used your 2 best practice sessions? is this still the outcome that you're trying to accomplish? Are these the core contacts? So really bringing those into the things that you're doing to have strong calls to action, to make sure that you have the right listening post, and you're really driving towards helping those customers be self-sufficient, with a pool team being there for a listening post for the different risks or opportunities that come up.
Yeah, using your pool team as a research team to build better programs.
Exactly.
I love that. Dan, what success have you had leading pool teams and pooled CSMs or digital CSMs? Actually, what did you call them? Digital CSMs or pooled CSMs?
Scale CSMs on our, we just kind of use that, just again, kind of more focused on. I love a little bit of what Lane was saying there, because it was very similar to what we did. It was kind of one title, but we gave flexibility to what we actually had people doing. So I would say a very key point is letting that be part of the feedback loop. I don't, not much else to say other than what Lane already shared there, because it's such an overlooked source of data. Is just, what are your customers actually reaching out about? What are they asking CSMs to do? Finding out what's the pooled ones are spending time on. I do think that within a pooled model, when people have found less success, it's when a pooled is used as a way to remove ownership and just say, great, this is just something for people to reach out to. And I think that can result in a poor customer experience if people don't have ownership. So finding ways to keep ownership even within a pooled model is massive, I think, whether it's through the project-based, like Lane was outlining, or I've seen some organizations, and I've seen some success with this, where on the back end in the system, CSMs are assigned ownership of certain customers in the system, even if from a customer perspective, it's pooled, they don't know who theirs is. So they can drive some of the programs for that cohort without crossing the lanes of what others are doing with theirs. And then we get the feedback for what works to go up into the global program of what everybody's doing, right? So creating ownership that way. And I think that that's what's been the key to successful pooled from my perspective, is ensuring the feedback loop there, like Lane mentioned, but also finding ways to create ownership even within pooled.
Yeah. And that's like the pooled, not pooled thing that we were talking about once, where your customers don't know that there's someone who's like actually assigned to that group, but there is someone assigned to that group for an inbound request and for proactive motions.
Yeah, I love that. That's the way that Dan went, because that was actually how I originally built my program. Is I never sent an email from an email like a CS SolarWinds, which was before. It came from me. So it was summer.l.jowett, and it was great. I had 2 different email addresses, caused a little confusion with internal communication, but it was very important to me that they were getting that personalized attention, that they felt like they were working with someone. You build a relationship with a person, not with an inbox. And I wanted this customer segment to feel like they were building a relationship with our organization, so that we could earn the right to save them. We could earn the right to expand, and we could just earn the right to have their business. So making sure that that ownership exists. There was a lot of really interesting policy things that would happen on the back end, so that if someone needed to take a particular customer conversation 2, 3, 4 steps down the road, they would hand it off to themselves, and then they would continue the communication in that way. But it was a way that someone always had a point of contact within the organization. And I was actually very proud that I was able to be that person for such a large customer group, because to Dan's point, you've got to have ownership, and you have to make sure that you're kind of keeping that you're keeping that accountability to that engagement that you're having with that customer segment. So that was something that we did when we built our program, was just making sure that instead of it being you're working digital, that's a never, I mean, it's a big thing for me. It's one of my pet peeves. You never tell a customer they're with a digital segment or you're virtual. You always make it that they feel just like every other customer that you have, because someone who is one of your smallest spenders today could be your largest customers next year. And putting them in a segment that they can feel like they might be less than is not a great way to start building that relationship.
I think that there's also a point there, the personalization aspect of it, right?
Yep.
One of the concerns that people had with a pooled segment were like, do I not ever get to meet with anyone? Right. And so one of the things that you also have to think about there is like digital motions and human-led motions overlap. right? And so digital motions might help create a human motion, right? And so one of the things that we also would say is like, we're never going to tell you, no, we're not going to meet with you, right? But we're also probably going to try to answer it first over email or a different type of conversation and then go into it. But we also worked a lot on let's time box engagements, right? So if someone was like, hey, I'm struggling with this, we say, okay, great. We're going to work on this with you for 4 weeks. We'll meet once a week for 4 weeks. At the end of that 4 weeks, you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, have to decide what you want to invest. Do you want to invest in services on our side to help you? Or do you want to invest in resources on your side to help you as well? So making sure that you set those expectations up front when you do that and know when there is an end date and when you need to have checkpoints, just as we would do as a CSM. Here's this point, here's that point, and here's how we're going to get to the next step.
Yeah, that's a great way
I love
to run the temporary engagement to close it as well. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, just I love that, and it shows some very similar themes. At Monday, we did 45 days, but it was the same thing. We time boxed it from the get-go, and we had almost a mini kickoff of, hey, here's what you reached out about. Here's the goals that we hope to accomplish in 45 days, and then you have the off of that, like have the off ramp baked in, so they weren't surprised. And to your point, Lane, it's you're not because we're not removing a human involvement as we're building the digital. We always make sure, okay, what is the pathway to get a human involved when they're needed to? We're always kind of keeping that in mind because there are times when a customer will just need to like speak with a person for something.
So it's important to always be available for customers, regardless of whether or not they're in a pulled motion. Like it needs to be very easy for them to get through to an expert. But equally, it's important to have that like definition of like when this ends, whether it's like an inbound request or an outbound motion, reaching out to them as well. I mean, in fact, did you do outbound as part of your pulled strategy, Lane?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
We have some outbound motions there. I think that the other piece to that is expectations.
Right.
We don't set expectations with our customers. And being Gainsight, we live in a world of like, you're the customer success organization, so you should be delivering customer success above what I even think the standard is, right?
Yeah. No
and that's something that you have to work against. And so that's why for ours, every transition from onboarding to the CS team, we did join that call. It wasn't going to be an email. It was a call where we sat down and we said, here are the things that you can expect. We will respond to emails 24/5 within, not 24/5, but within one business day of you reaching out. So that there was that expectation of like, you're not going to go a week without hearing from us. You're going to see something from us monthly over email. We're going to have these office hours. So you can set the right expectations. And say, this is one of the things that I also worked with when I was running our mid-market segment, is set the expectations with your customers. Otherwise, they're going to make their own and they're going to hold you to them. Yeah.
So important. Dan, did you have something to add there?
No, nope. Lane did it perfectly. I'll hand the mic to Lane so she can drop it, so.
I love it. All right, it's great to see some questions coming through. We'll make sure we leave enough time to answer all of them. If you have some questions, please add to them now. Before we do that though, let me ask you all just what advice do you have for someone who is not sure where to get started with scaling their CS program?
I always like to mention, start with strengthening the foundation of what you already have, and then maybe identify, rather than try to scorch the earth and do everything at once, because that's how you get quickly overwhelmed. The whole kind of classic advice, eating the elephant one bite at a time, in the sense of identify one motion, maybe even that you think you can accomplish via a non-human driven channel, and start with that. Prove the value that, to Lane's point earlier, like she mentioned, what is it that you're trying to accomplish with that monthly cadence call that you can maybe replace with a digital kind of asynchronous touch point with customers? Think through it in that sense. And I think that starting that way is something that can allow you to like really quickly get the ball rolling. And even tactically, even something like I think a really easy starting point for a lot of customers is office hours. It's a really simple way to convert the time that would have been spent with one customer into a group of customers suddenly. And it's just small things like that I think are really important for getting the snowball rolling, because I think it's easy to sometimes hear on a webinar like this where Lane, Summer, myself, we've been in organizations that have built this out over years, and you're hearing the result of where we got to over years of building and think, oh, I've got to start with that, when you don't. You can, start with the smaller components of focusing on one thing, I think is really important.
Yeah, I love that. Start somewhere.
And
Yeah.
I think starting small, right? Like if you, one of the things that we talk about sometimes is map out the things that you could do or should do, and a wonderful 2x2. What is low priority and or low impact but high effort? So impact versus effort. And those things that are high impact but low effort, go knock those out. Go take them, identify them, run with them. And then you're going to start to see where you're going to be able to save time on an efficiency front to start working on those things that are higher effort, but still high impact as well. Those things that are low effort, low impact, just move them to the side, or high effort, low impact, those shouldn't be where your focus are. And so really starting to identify that. I think, like Dan said, office hours are a great place to start. Or even one of the things that we did a lot when we started out was, what's a topic that a lot of your customers are asking about? Just pull them, like 5 of them into a room together on a Zoom chat and say, hey, you're all asking this question and you're all asking some really good questions and have different points of view on it. Let's just talk it out and bring them together. A lot of people get concerned around that, of like, what if they're my competitor? I can't share this. Like, in customer success, I find there's so much willingness to share ideas and how to get to where you need to go, that it's not going to be an issue.
Absolutely.
I think the only thing I could add to that, because I actually was like, don't boil the ocean, which is exactly what Dan was saying about, how we're going to go eat our elephants. But to Lane's point earlier, start with the research. Make sure that, map your customer's journey, fill those pain points, and figure out where those gaps are and things that are going to be easy to address using your 4 box. So, it's very easy to want to jump in. There's a lot of problems that we can solve, but the exciting thing about that is a lot of places you can make an impact. Pick one. Pick one that makes sense for you based off of who you are, your background, your skill set, your passions, and start there. And then over time, you'll be able to kind of build and create a program similar to kind of what you've seen Dan able to talk about today and Lane able to talk about today.
Absolutely. All right, great advice. We have some questions coming in here. Can you all see the questions, or would you like me to read them out? All right. Does anyone want to take that first question?
AI. I'll take the AI from a generative AI perspective. So we have been doing a lot of work around like creating GPTs to help our team. So one of them that we recently created was this idea of moving faster with some of our in-app engagements. So we trained it on the voice and tone of Gainsight. And so for our release communications, we can now take a screenshot of a slide, drop it in there, and it can be like, this is what it should say. Right. And of course, like we massage it a little bit more afterwards to make sure it's right. So I look at this more on like my teammates' efficiencies. We use AI as a thought partner. How do we do that? And so it allows us to move faster to get the bigger ROI.
So
agree.
You're using AI to help your team with their content creation.
Yep.
I was going to say the two big ones are kind of Copilot and content creation. I think internal focus is there, because it's, yes, you still review, like, is it sending the right signals? Is it helping me identify the right themes from to Summer's point earlier about needing, data, and what you mentioned, Gemma, there's tools out there via AI that can help you with that will let you punch above your weight in terms of if you don't have a data analyst to do that. Like, there are tools that can help with that from an AI perspective. Which gives some good ROI, as well as, I would say, that content creation. I think that doing that is a lower barrier to entry than the customer facing side.
Completely agree. Summer, how have you used AI, or how do you intend to use AI for digital programs?
Yeah, I think initially most organizations were a little hesitant to kind of move too forward on AI. It is definitely one of those, you've got to make sure you've added the right insights, you've garbage in, like garbage out. We want to make sure that the AI is creating value, especially when you're moving at scale, right? You need to have a lot of trust in the AI tool to move forward. What I will say is similar to Dan and Lane, the Copilot, incredibly important. The ability to make sure that the team is running their messages through in a way that we're using that as a way to create more content, to move a little bit faster. I would love to answer this question in 6 months to a year, because I think we are right standing over the edge of the cliff, about to see some very exciting things happen in this space using AI and the tools. I think that we're just not there yet. So it's going to make a huge impact. It's just around the corner. But right now, I think what you're seeing a lot of is how can we use the tools and the insights to strengthen the communication in a little bit more of a passive way, while we're seeing what the technology looks like a few months down the road.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think we are on the cusp of tremendous change, and we're seeing that through our investments in the CS Angel investing group as well. There's so many incredible tools out there compared to when we started doing this a year and a half ago.
I can add one more thing. I know we're right at time. I think the other piece of it is like AI and digital, like because our products are digital, and so many organizations are building AI into their platforms. I know we've done a lot there that it's going to seem similar or the same, but we have to figure out, like, is it a digital engagement that's driven by digital customer success, or is it something that's going to be expected natively in the product? And that's where some people might put the two together and say this AI thing that's in the product, that's digital customer success. But I think for me, I think of them a little bit separate in the way of like the AI is part of the product and the digital success is how I help you use it and get to that next step.